Hello. I hope I'm live. Sorry about the delay, everyone. I had to do the very English thing of putting my chips in the oven. So, you'll have to forgive me for a few moments. But, considering the last time I did one of these streams, it performed very well. People seem to enjoy the format. They seem to appreciate my opportunity to address their questions and their super chats, which I'll try and do as we go along, but if not, I'll save it for the end. I thought I'd return to form, and it seems necessary to document in real time just how many atrocities, crimes are happening in my country and across Europe, because as you can see on the screen, just yesterday, on the 5th of November, if you attached a wind turbine to Guy Fawkes's grave, the various quartered parts of him would generate enough power to get Germany off of Russian gas. But just yesterday, a driver, just a man, as is often in these headlines, ploughed into a crowd in France on Ile de Lorient. Excuse my French, I only did stage management, not acted in the school production of Beauty and the Beast, so it's a bit rusty. And this man was yelling Allahu Akbar, which, as we all know, just means God is great. That's the reason they yell it every time that they drive a truck into a crowd or a Christmas market, that someone whips out a knife or a bomb and blows up a boot, or someone decides to shoot a bunch of innocent people, as we'll be getting on to an attempt to do so later. And the reason I decided to discuss that, and as you can tell with the stream title, is because no matter which country it is in the West, no matter what the motivations of the perpetrator are, whether they are an out-of-their-mind African schizo or a doctrinaire jihadist who believes the West is guilty of tempting them with Facebook and alcohol and women walking around without a bin bag on, we are always told that whether because they have a passport, because they were born on our soil, they're as British as you and me. And this is what's killed civic nationalism. It was always dead, it was always absurd, by the way. But civic nationalism has been killed because if your nation is just a proposition, if it's just a set of values, and killing people, attempting to kill people, driving a car into a Christmas market, yelling Allahu Akbar right before you set your car on fire, or a police van, as we'll see soon, if none of those exclude you from being as British or as French or as German as Queen Victoria, Charles de Gaulle, or Otto von Bismarck, then what is civic nationalism? What's the utility of it? The utility is to deny your identity and to flood you with unassimilable foreigners until they reach a demographic tipping point to take over your civilization by democratic, or as we'll see, increasingly by violent means. And so it's just a mass gaslighting attempt to tell you that you aren't allowed to put up a fight against demographic replacement because you don't actually have an identity anyway, and that you have to obey the law because the law is instinctive to you, because it is a contortion of your traditions that your ancestors built up and created to form a thriving, peaceful and prosperous society. It's especially true in Britain, maybe less so with the French. We've got our old rivalries, you can forgive me a bit of playful ribbing in these trying times, even though we are all in the same boat. But because these laws speak to your soul, the police will apply them to you, but not to the hostile tribal newcomers who are protected by them via unilateral hate speech legislation. And then, when they escalate to violence because their impulse control has failed to stop them from kicking off and lighting fireworks in the middle of the street, well, they're either not prosecuted, or they're given light sentences, and they live in prison conditions with PlayStations and make-work jobs and mosque hours that are much better than the homes in their homeland. So, the male driver, who was known to police, by the way, so yet again another instance where the diversity could have been stopped doing what it usually does. It brings to mind, you know, that video of the beaver who builds a dam in a doorway out of cuddly toys? Totally unrelated. The male driver rammed into pedestrians and cyclists on Ile-de-Laurent off the Atlantic coast on Wednesday morning before 9 a.m. France's Interior Minister said 5 people were hit during the 35-minute rampage. 2 were seriously injured, including a 22-year-old woman suffering multiple trauma injuries. 3 sustained minor injuries. The suspect was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, just suspicion, and an investigation had been opened. He is someone who is known particularly to the police for behaviour that is not entirely normal and for alcohol-related problems. I am sure he will be told at his trial that he was not a good enough Muslim, as the rapist that we covered last time was. I think we just shouldn't have these people here in the first place if they are liable to drive into crowds of pedestrians for racial or religious reasons. I think we could just be left in peace. That would be much more preferable, rather than just being constantly swamped by jihadists who hate us. Speaking of terrorism, we have the Prevent referrals out. Latest numbers from Sky News. Put your per capita hats on, lads, because we're going to need them. So the highest number of people on record have been referred to Prevent. 37% rise in right-wing extremism concerns. Bear in mind, from my reporting, they consider cultural nationalism to be a right-wing extremist terror ideology. Cultural nationalism being the belief that your country is under threat by unassimilable foreign nationals breaking into your borders via boats in the small channel, or passing through the passport gates at Heathrow and Gatwick, getting the proper documents, and still going on a stabbing spree anyway. Didn't they know that they're meant to be assimilated by now? I'm sure education program will fix this. A total of 8,778 individuals were referred to Prevent, highest since records began in 2015. 27% increase from the previous year's 6,922 referrals. The increase for people referred to extreme right-wing concerns, they accounted for 21% overall, a 37% rise from 1,314, 19% the year before. Yet again, remember that the list of texts that Prevent considers extreme right-wing, that a former police officer, had his home raided for, and police commented were very Brexity books, include Douglas Murray, Peter Hitchens, George Orwell's 1984, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, The Lord of the Rings, Beowulf, John Locke's 2 Treatises of Government, and Michael Portillo's Great Western Railway Journeys. So the most anodyne possible works of literature and philosophy. Not the Quran, though. No. Prevent bend over backwards to insist that Islam is a religion of peace. Don't worry about that. Actually, let's open that one up, because that has to be seen to be believed. So a little while ago, I did some reporting on the Prevent guidance, saying that cultural nationalism was an extreme terror ideology, and I brought it to the attention of the American State Department, who were shocked, and they condemned the UK government for it. So this is what gets you referred to Prevent as a terrorist. Western culture is under threat from mass migration and a lack of integration by certain ethnic and cultural groups. Yeah, Muslim terrorists and black schizos. I think that's a big problem at the moment, because none of them need to be here threatening the lives of our population. And if that makes me a cultural nationalist, cart me off in cuffs, I suppose. Something happened the other night, by the way, that you may be interested in. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, my wife woke up shrieking, and I heard a knock at my door, and I checked the Ring doorbell, and there were 2 police officers standing there. And so I genuinely thought, because I've read my soldier knits, and oh, they've come for me in the middle of the night because they knew I would be here, and they knew I'd be disoriented enough to say something that would be incriminating. This is what happened to Pete North, remember? He was arrested, like 3 in the morning for an anti-Hamas meme. And police officers almost looked embarrassed being there, but they still, like good little foot soldiers, carried out their marching orders from the College of Policing. So I went and answered the door, and fortunately, and it's on film, but of course I'm not going to release the film because then people know where I live. Fortunately, they were doing a welfare check for the woman who used to live here because her daughter had issues, and they didn't know that she had moved, and they didn't know her new address. And so in the 1 to 2 minute exchange, they asked me my name and who I was living with, which I thought was strange. And I notified them that the person they were looking for wasn't there, and they walked along on their merry way. Now, what kind of a country do we live in where I am panicked, having done nothing wrong, about 2 police officers turning up at my house in the middle of the night? It's because of things like this, Where you, if you're concerned for the fate of your country because you see an endless stream of migrant crime that never needs to happen, you, if you comment about it on social media or on YouTube, you, if they have the temerity to notice differences between peoples and cultures, yeah, you can be arrested by the state. I think it's probably only a matter of time until they try and do something about me, and I'll be on the phone to the Free Speech Union and Fair Cop, though who knows at this point. I can just, if they do that, just hope that their state overreach repudiates any moral legitimacy that they might have. Bear in mind, though, when they try and find this on the page, Prevent actually wrote on their website that Islamism should not be considered to represent the followers of Islam. Just like absolutely demented. Just completely demented. Let me see if I can find a Prevent guidance, because this is really worth looking at, because Prevent have a glossary of terms which is used in all public sector bodies, especially schools, and this is why the schools are actually the epicenter for referrals now. So the vast majority were referred via schools. They've gone up for... Here we go. They've gone up for the police as well. Here we go. Islamist terrorism. Islamist terrorism is the threat or use of violence as a means to establish a strict interpretation of Islamic society. So, within the first sentence, they concede that an Islamic society is rooted in doctrine, but will continue. For some, this is a political ideology which envisions, for example, the creation of a global Islamic caliphate based on a strict implementation of Sharia law. Don't worry, we'll get to Sharia law later in the broadcast. Many adherents believe that violence, or jihad as they conceive it, look at all of the... Jihad is most frequently mentioned in the Quran in conjunction with fighting, or mujahideen, fighters. It's why the mercenary band that then formed the Taliban were called the mujahideen. There was a caliph that succeeded Muhammad who said that jihad was his way of life, and he wrote an entire book of hadiths on jihad, specifically warfare. So don't gaslight us, but of course, the Islamic network don't want too much scrutiny about their particular faith and the political influence it has over us. I'll skip to the end. It says, Islamists should not be interpreted as a reference to individuals who follow the religion of Islam. Establish a strict interpretation of Islamic society, but it's got nothing to do with Islam. The contradiction is the point. It's about gaslighting you, and if you notice the contradiction, you notice patterns about who's responsible for the terrorism, they will call you a cultural nationalist and cart you off in cuffs. And that is why the referrals for the far right have been going up. It's because if you don't think that Islamic terrorists are as British as you and me, you yourself are the terrorist. This was higher, the referrals to the far right, than those related to Islamic extremism, which accounted for 10% compared to 13%. They have been dropping steadily since the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, even though Islamic terror attacks are continually thwarted. So they are just not looking at Islamic terror. As one of the members of the Islamic network said in a seminar, any monitoring of Islamic terrorism is itself racist by Prevent, and then she pointed and laughed at an ISIS training video, recognising an old classmate saying, I know him, he went to my school. Those are the people that are controlling Prevent. That is why terrorists are being let go undetected, and we'll talk about some of those in a bit. The data shows the number of referrals for individuals with no ideology was by far the greatest share of all referrals, 4,917. But these cases were less likely to be adopted by the panel, multi-agency groups, that assess those who may be at risk of radicalization. Okay, so they have various factors, including the high rates of schizophrenia among some communities. But this is a nebulous cloud in which to hide people who are Islamic terrorists, like Abi Ali or Axel Rudakubana. Well, Rudakubana was examining Islamic terror materials and may or may not go to mosque while being imprisoned at Belmarsh. I think it's actually just that he's a low IQ head case who wanted white genocide more than he was actually a jihadist. But by hiding these people in the nebulous cloud of multiple factors or no ideology or just mental health problems, it means they never address the root cause of said radicalization. They don't have any follow-ups by Prevent officers, and then they go and commit terror attacks like Abi Ali, who murdered Sir David Amos because of his stance on Libya. Only 10% of 1,908 no-ideology referrals were adopted, compared with 34% of extreme right-wing and 27% of those with a fascination with extreme violence or mass casualty attacks. Islamic extremism is only 26%. They are myopically focused on the far right. They want to confect this threat because they want to tell you that you aren't allowed to complain about being submerged by the third world in your own homeland. That's what they want to do. And so the gaslighting is unbelievable, and they only do this so they can get these headlines to create the public perception that the far right are about to plot horrific terror attacks across the country, and therefore any politician they tar with the brush of far right, any public figure they tar with the brush of far right, is enabling a climate of violence, and so that justifies the suppression of their speech, their ostracism from public life, their censorship on social media, all of the various anti-terror measures that were brought in for Islamic terrorists after 7/7 or 9/11, but are always weaponized against the native population who have not wanted the terrorists imported into their midst in the first place. There are 142 referrals to prevent per million people across England and Wales. The West Midlands received the highest number of referrals per million people. How curious. So, areas with high Muslim populations and the indigenous population who didn't want the Muslim populations imported into their midst have the highest levels of referrals. Strange that. Weird how there's not a lot of far-right terrorism in the Cotswolds. Though there might be if they end up building that mega mosque in the Lake District. Like every other year, the education sector made up the highest share of referrals with 3,129. Now, via people who work in the education system, which I've reported on before with leaks from these activist organisations that are brought into schools that say tradwifery is anti-Semitic far-right propaganda, and that if a young boy is posting on forums his concerns about immigration and putting stickers up in public parks, then he needs to be referred to prevent. They have turned schools into this panopticon for politically incorrect behaviour, specifically among young boys. They have told predominantly female, left-leaning unionised teachers to be on the watch for toxic masculinity, anti-immigrant sentiment, discrimination, bullying behaviour, and they're already primed to see their non-white students and female students as perennial victims, and so refer, at the first sign of trouble, a child to prevent. Now, I hated my school experience. I'm so glad I'm not going now, because obviously I would be on a fast track to a youth intervention programme for my unorthodox opinions, which were just the normal opinions of all of our grandparents 100 years ago. But people like Axel Rudakubana, oh no, they can complete a no knives save lives worksheet within half an hour and receive a pat on the back before going and murdering girls at a dance class. There's $10 super chat here that says, I'll say this as an American, I see the UK, Ireland and France as it is now, the continuing, and he says white erasure, which is what our enemies want because they think in racial terms, is real. And he says that he thinks that voting isn't going to work. Well, we must continue to commit ourselves to the democratic process, if not least of all because you don't want to give this government an excuse to crack down on you and say that you're inciting violence. We do not Fed post here, so no Fed posting in chat, no matter what super chats are given. We must continue to create room to maneuver for our politicians who lack courage and virtue, who see what must be done, what is popular, and what is possible. And so that's what I exist to do. I exist outside of political systems to encourage politicians to enact the policies which are righteous and just, and actually much easier to do than they are led to believe by a hostile media environment in Westminster. You know, proceduralism really does capture the imagination. Anyway, education was 40% of referrals last year, so it's dipped down by 4%, and police forces is increased by 37%. We've seen how police are very vigilant about criminalising online speech by turning up to people's doors and noting their politically incorrect thoughts, but they haven't solved a single burglary. You know, there's a rape every hour that happens in London, and most of those go unsolved. But don't worry, Fraser Nelson has a graph that tells you overall crime is going down. Never mind the fact that knife crime's going up, rape's going up, and that every single crime committed by an immigrant never needed to happen in the first place. But, of course, he can't tell the difference between his Swedish or Eastern European wife and a Somali drill rapper, so he's not going to crack that particular intellectual nut, is he? The most interesting one here. Details on ethnicity. 65% were white, 19% were Asian, 8% were black, and 8% were other. Now, according to the last census, that's a vast overrepresentation of Asian perpetrators. It also says ethnicity here. That's not ethnicity. That's race. So if we broke it down by ethnicity, Asian, you could break that down into Japanese or Sikh, perhaps Sikh Indian. If we looked at Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian Muslim, I think we're going to see a much more pronounced demographic disparity, don't you? And then if we were to properly calibrate for what far-right terrorism meant, you know, if there was an actual neo-Nazi Anders Breivik-style cell out there going and killing children at a summer camp, yeah, of course. Try him, imprison him, bring back the death penalty for such a person. But that's not what they're monitoring. They're monitoring sticker campaigns like the type that got Sam Melia imprisoned. And so, stickers versus blowing up a pop concert. I think there's some order of magnitude here that means that you aren't quite monitoring the disparity well, are you? It's just a gaslighting exercise to get you to accept terrorists as indistinguishably British as you and me, to therefore not have any argument against mass demographic and cultural change. Speaking of terrorists, this was reported by ITV this week. British man arrested in the UK over a Hamas terror plot. British man. Wow, a British man took up with Hamas. I know there's been a few ginger converts recently. There was one that was actually arrested the other day that I should have gotten up. But a British man involving himself with Hamas. Wow, things are getting serious. If you scroll down, ITV News has been told the British suspect is the son of a senior Hamas official. Oh, he's given a passport. No questions need to be asked. That, you know, just got radicalized from Instagram, I suppose, from TikTok. Question: why are we giving senior Hamas officials' sons British passports? Because no matter one's thoughts on Israel, yet again, I am sick of Israel discourse. It shouldn't be the sun around which all of our politics revolve. Israel's not my country. I just want what Israel has. That's a reasonable request. No matter one's thoughts about Israel, Hamas aren't big fans of Britain for giving up the Palestinian mandate, or having it in the first place. They don't like Christians, kuffar. They certainly don't like white people. And centuries of cousin marriage has meant that their impulse control wouldn't be excellent if they were brought over here and given the means to repeat on October 7th against our people. So why on earth are we having the sons of the terror group that perpetrated it and have organised many terror attacks across the years, with funding from various proxies? Because, of course, as soon as they set foot on our soil and they have the appropriate documents, they're British. They're just British. They're British as you and me. Why would you even ask questions as to why he might try and plot a jihadist attack? In the course of today's arrest, various weapons, including an AK-47 assault rifle and several pistols, as well as a considerable amount of ammunition, were found, federal prosecutors said in their statement published last month. Bear in mind, they were arrested in Germany. So, wanted by federal police in Germany as part of a major counter-terror operation, which last month led to the arrest of 3 men suspected of preparing acts of violence against Jewish targets in Germany on behalf of Hamas. Why have we imported these people into Europe? They do not belong here. They have never belonged here. In fact, they have a very long historical memory and basically want another crusade against us. Like, believe what they say when they say it, and especially when they do it. You know, Magdeburg Christmas market, or the Munich attack that took that poor girl's leg off. The Manchester Arena bombing, the 2017 London Bridge attack, 2017 Westminster Bridge attack, 7/7 bombings, beheading of Lee Rigby, Reading stabbing. Now this guy. It's not like we don't know who's doing this and how this can happen, but yet again our treacherous politicians give them a passport and demand that we see them as indistinguishable from ourselves. The 3 men in question were identified as German citizens. Ah, they're just German citizens. Germans and Brits committing a lot of jihadist attacks recently. Strange. Something must have changed in the few thousand years where the Anglos were wandering around in the woods when Tacitus encountered the German tribes that held the sentiments that became English common law, he must have missed out the part when they yelled Allahu Akbar, death to the Jews and death to the infidels. Strange, that one. It's a bit of a glaring omission in historical accounts of northwestern European tribes. Oh, and there's a Lebanese-born man as well. So I suppose that explains it. The Lebanese man. But hang on a minute. If he reveres the king, he likes democracy, plays cricket, well, he's just Britain in waiting, isn't he? He's just Britain, but he's born in the wrong place. This sort of geographic injustice must be rectified immediately by a chartered flight into Manchester and a full scholarship, which has happened with a bunch of Palestinians, by the way, flown in via Jordan, given full scholarships so they can come and study in Britain. Excellent. I'm sure they won't turn out like the Indian Muslims who planned the Glasgow airport bombing attack and thankfully screwed it up and doused themselves in chemicals, set themselves on fire and got kicked in the balls by a baggage handler. John something. Good man. But I'm sure those engineering students won't all immediately start building the suicide bombs that Palestine, being the #1 nation on the earth, supports suicide bombing in the defense of Islam for. I'm sure that would be absolutely no problem for the British nationals who didn't want this to happen in the first place. This is what Dominic Cummings has pointed out. So Ed West quoted this article and said the British suspect is the son of a senior Hamas official. Dominic Cummings says, our regime imports terrorists, gives them passports, calls them British, then says, oh, he turned out to be a violent terrorist, but he's British, so this has nothing to do with immigration. Diversity is our strength, and you're racist if you disagree. Most voters think this is mental, but it's been a cross-party consensus for 25 years, like prioritising the rights of foreign murderers over Britain's safety in law. It will continue for years. If you get killed, the MPs will babble thoughts and prayers, but leave the laws in place. The one problem with this, and I think Dominic Cummings' assessment of things is usually correct, is that Dominic Cummings has been a lifelong friend of Michael Gove, who was the permanent fixture of the Conservative government's successive cabinets for 14 years, who still champions Muslim migration, who still thinks there's a British Islam, and who still thinks that anyone who identifies as British or English is indistinguishably British from you and me, and is not willing to rescind via his civic nationalist platitudes. Remember, when at the Department of Education, Michael Gove invented the 5 fingers of British values on a conspicuously non-white hand. He's not willing to rescind the status of British from actual terrorists. Now, he has no excuse because he wrote Fahrenheit 7/7 in the aftermath of the 7/7 bombings that documented the Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim Council of Britain, all of these various jihadist organisations that have committed terror attacks or have inspired jihadists to go off and join ISIS across the years. And like a total coward, he increased mass Third World migration instead, and Dominic Cummings has continued to be his friend and ally. Recently, if you remember the Pharos debate that he did, or the Pharos lecture and then the Q&A with my good friend Stephen Edgington, he reveals that he and Michael Gove had valiantly fought for Andrew Never, the Times journalist, in order to get his story out about the rape gangs. Now, Andrew Never himself did not want to report on it for quite a while because he thought it was the fantasy of the far right, that it was going to cause Islamophobia, but eventually he did report on it, so he should be commended for that. But apparently Michael Gove and Dominic Cummings fought on the side of Andrew Never against the Department of Education civil servants who were going to take out an injunction against this being reported because the department knew for years under the previous Blair government and sought to colour it up. Excellent. I'm so glad that the only stories being told about Gove are about how he was the only good thing about the last government. Doesn't explain, though, why he stood by and did nothing and continues to excuse the mass importing of Muslims into our country after they keep committing terror attacks and participate in the grooming gangs. So, excellent analysis from Dominic Cummings, but yet again, there are so many people that are culpable for bringing these scumbags into our country that even when they have a salient analysis of what's gone wrong, their hands still have dirt on them. Next one. This chap. So apparently the far right, according to Prevent, is the problem in our country. This chap was chased down and arrested by police. They found in his car boot 2 AK-47s. This is Walid Sadawai. Good British name. He was detained in Bolton on the 8th of May 2024. And he was charged alongside Ammar Hussain of No Fixed Abode. A lot of men that come from there that seem to commit crimes. Weird country, that. On terror charges. He was charged with terror charges. Accused with terror charges. His brother, Bilal Sadawai, has also failed to disclose acts of terrorism. He's been charged with failing to disclose acts of terrorism. And they're being tried at Preston Crown Court. This is Mr. Walid. For some reason in Britain, we don't have photos of the accused, despite being charged. So, Mr. Walid planned a gun attack on a gathering of Jews. I'm pretty sure he'd want to shoot the native population too. Described the killing of 130 people and wounding of hundreds more in Paris, so Bataclan, the Bataclan massacre, in 2015 as a great event. If you've ever read or heard the horrific details of the torture that the captives of the Bataclan massacre underwent, like being castrated and having parts of themselves that had been removed put in their own mouths before being shot to death, you would know that these savages want this for our families too. So, he said he hero worshipped Abdul Hamid Aboud, who orchestrated the Bataclan massacre and aspired to emulate him. He unwittingly revealed plans to an undercover operative called Farouk. He told jurors at Preston Crown Court he believed Mr. Sahoudi had told him on Facebook he needed to conduct a Paris-style attack in northwestern England. He denies preparing acts of terrorism. So they've basically caught him red-handed with all the messages. They've caught the guns in his car. And yet again, because these people have no conscience, because honesty is not a principle in their religion, because they don't care about us, because they don't extend moral consideration outside the principle of asabaya to themselves, their family, their clan, and specifically the Ummah, the global Muslim race, they always plead not guilty and hope they can get away with it. They're actually just annoyed by encounters with our justice system. They see us as an unfair impediment to their holy mission, or, in many cases, to the gratification of their impulses, which they can't control because low IQ and centuries of cousin marriage. So, his co-conspirator denies the same, and his brother also denies the charges put to him. He said, in one message, "May God preserve you. You need to do what he had done, the Bataclan massacre perpetrator, make him a role model and carry out operations against the Jews and the Crusaders there, and hitting them affects them badly." The Crusaders there being Christians, being Western civilization, being us collectively, being whites. They hold a historical, racial, religious, ethnic grudge against us, and they genuinely believe that mass indiscriminate terror against us and Jews alike will bring about Judgment Day, where the Caliphate will return, and they'll all live basking in the glory of Allah when they see his shin or something. Go listen to David Wood for more on that utter nonsense. Walid is also to have written, quote, "I can use a knife in the operation, but this will not be enough to take revenge, only the automatic gun, and he wants to kill as many as possible." This sounds a lot like the guy who stabbed a pensioner in Hartlepool after stabbing another illegal migrant he was sharing a hotel with, who shouted this is for Gaza, and had said if he had had an automatic weapon, he would have killed as many children as possible as retribution for Israel bombing Palestine. He says, "I have to endeavour the biggest number possible. This is my intention, God willing." In another message to the jury, Walid Sadawi said the Paris attacks were the biggest operation after that of Osama. "Good, tight organisation, good execution, and above all, the enabling of God Almighty may be glorified. It was a great event, brother." Why are these people in my country? Are we supposed to believe that this man is as British as you and me? Because it seems he has a passport. It seems he lives here. He touched the magic soil. So why is he planning terror attacks against Jews and Crusaders? It's because these people don't belong here. They will never assimilate. Assimilation is a total myth. Very few people have ever assimilated. Very few people have met the biblical standard of Ruth, renouncing loyalties to the people, abandoning their fealties to previous principalities, adopting the state religion, and incorporating themselves into our family. There are maybe a handful of historical examples. Now, we should run our immigration policy along the lines of friends and enemies. The people we want here should stay, the people we want to go should go, and the vast majority are people that we want to go. And that seems perfectly sensible to me. But there are still people out there that will tell you that this guy, Walid Sadawi, is as British as you and me. By the way, I commented on this a little while ago, that I had a tip from a few sources that said that foreign intelligence are monitoring 30,000 active Islamic terror suspects in Britain, that a small group are going to arm themselves with homemade explosive devices, Molotov cocktails, machetes, and automatic weapons, and attack critical infrastructure and dense civilian housing. Whole cities could be set ablaze, multiple simultaneous attacks could spread, the police and emergency services thin, and inspire copycat attackers and opportunist looters to capitalise on the chaos. The source warned people smuggling gangs are facilitating the passage of trained Islamic militants across Europe and into Britain. In 2015, intercepted telephone calls and letter correspondence between ISIS members revealed their ambition to use migrant boats across the Mediterranean as a psychological weapon against Europe. This year we caught 3 Iranian nationals, given the right to remain in Britain after illegally arriving via lorry and small boats, meaning they're as British as you and me, of course, and they were charged with spying for Tehran and plotting terrorist violence. Patrick Christis had already revealed on GB News that the people smuggling gangs are now marketing to Muslim men using ISIS footage, saying, "We know that you want to do this, pay for our services to smuggle you into Europe and you will fulfill your holy mission." And then, the National Crime Agency, around the time that I was writing this story, uncovered a truck. The driver of the Lithuanian registered lorry was a Tajikistan national. He was arrested and then mysteriously released on bail for some reason, but he was smuggling in guns and drugs. So, how many other weapons have been smuggled in across boats and lorries, which are also bringing jihadist fighters into our country? How many others haven't been caught? What about this guy? There was a guy the other day. This posted a thread here. He was standing atop a police van in Leeds, and he was burning a Quran, or holding a Quran, sorry, burning the police van, and yelling Allahu Akbar. Apparently, he's a Jordanian male escort. And he's an asylum seeker who's using universal credit. So we're paying for him to be in this country. He constantly goes to Palestine protests. He's got a Jordanian number, and he's been charged. This is Hakam Geith, 29, charged with arson, and remanded to appear before Leeds Magistrates Court. He's been in the UK for 5 years, claims universal credit, even though he has the right to work. Of course, he was yelling Allahu Akbar, standing on the police van, setting it ablaze. Do you know how the leftist outlets reported this? Let's go to the Canary, who had previously, I believe, published Harry Schuckman, the Hope Not Hate operative who used a fake passport. Man with mental health issues sets fire to police van in Leeds. Ah, yes. Man with mental health issues. Ah, he just had a bit of an episode, you see. He got a bit anxious and set fire to a police van and yelled Allahu Akbar. I agree these people are crazy. That doesn't exculpate them from being evil. And let's say they are crazy. Do you know what they don't deserve? Our sympathy. What they deserve is to never be allowed into my country in the first place to do such things. Let's go to Birmingham, because at the moment there are mass protests going on about this football match between Aston Villa and Maccabi Tel Aviv, which is the Jewish team that haven't been allowed to bring their fans into our country. By the way, I'm fine for deterring literally anyone from our country. So, if we choose to do this, for any country, on principle, it's fine. The reason for doing so is, of course, though, because Birmingham is a Muslim ghetto, and because the match is being hosted in Birmingham, the local MP and the local population, who are all obsessed with Jews and don't like them very much because of various hadiths and historical conflicts between Muhammad and Jewish tribes in Medina, yeah, they were going to kick off about it. So, they were banned, and even though they were banned, because the team is there, there's now a massive pro-Palestine protest. Pretty much all Muslims, again. And you can see, I think it's Ahmed Yaqub is his name. He was the lawyer who ran as a parliamentary candidate last time around, who laughed about an Islamic takeover of Britain on a podcast. And he just did a video on Twitter, or he did a video that was posted to Twitter, I should correct myself, where he was explaining to his potential legal clients that if you're caught with a baseball bat, for example, and it could be considered a blunt instrument, an offensive weapon, make sure you have other sports equipment on hand, because you're definitely going to a sporting event, and so the police can't arrest you because you have probable cause to carry said baseball bat. We know what they're doing. Yeah, totally legitimate legal advice. Not at all giving them a plausible reason to be tooled up and walking around a local area and then get a slap on the wrist. Do you remember when that community enforcement officer told the Muslim militias who were masked and armed after the Southport protests to put your weapons in the mosque and there'll be no more trouble? What else are they stashing in the mosques, given we know that guns are being run over? Serious cause for concern. 700 officers are in Birmingham at the moment, anticipating the match. They have already put in a, Section 60 public space protection order, which basically says that you can't have masks on. Of course, people will violate that, and they'll probably receive no penalties for this. Do you know who has been arrested? A guy called Young Bob. He's like a 17-year-old man on the street interviewer for protests. I think he works at Turning Point UK. And he went up to the other side and asked them why they were there. He tried to talk to someone. The police then came over and arrested him for trying to talk to them. Because they know you will comply with the law. Because they actually know the distinction between who is British and who isn't. And so they arrest the Brits while allowing the third world thugs to go around and agitate on behalf of a prescribed terror group who the sons and organisers of want to commit terror attacks in Europe. It's not just a Jewish thing, it's against us too. They hate us too. And this is why I must point out, not to cause any infighting here, especially because of current controversies on the American right, but just because there are left-wing Jewish organisations that have facilitated mass migration does not mean that Muslims, because they are slightly socially conservative and there's no trans in madrasas, that they are our co-belligerents. Hamas is not a political organisation. Muslims are not natural allies of Christians. They hate us too. They hate white people. They prey on our children. And I think it would be very silly for the right to make common cause with them also. Take a lesson from the UK. You don't want areas of America, as Michigan and Minnesota and parts of Texas are already becoming, to turn into Birmingham, Bradford, Leeds, Leicester, Luton, Oldham, Rochdale, Rotherham, Blackburn. Take your pick. Not good. So then these guys were going around. They are from an organisation called Deenified. Deen means the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. So they try and live in Salafist fashion as closely as possible to the 7th century warlord himself, presumably having his same questionable views on the age of consent. And they walked around the area, and they were, sorry for the Tuscan Raider speak, they walked around the area putting up signs saying, you know, no war games allowed, Zionists not welcome. And this drew the ire of various politicians, right? So Michael Gove, Priti Patel, condemning it because it's anti-Semitic. Okay, fine, you know. Compared to Muslim enclaves, you know, the Jews aren't running around cutting people's heads off. Again, there might be political problems with left-wing Jews who, like Barbara Roach, apply the liberal, multicultural, nation of immigrants lie standard to Britain, but want Israel to be a home for the Jewish ethnic people. We can have our political battles about that. But, you know, they're not blowing up buses or pop concerts. Fine. Why do you only care when it's Jews? Yeah, I know that's very taboo. Why do you only care when it's Jews being targeted? Why do you only care about dealing with what Douglas Murray would call the second-order effects, anti-Semitic abuse, but not the first-order causes, bringing third-world savages into our country in the first place? Like, if Mein Kampf is on sale at train stations in their countries, you could probably predict they were going to do this. It's this fiction that when they get a British passport, if they're born in Britain, when they attend British universities, when they have undergone a sufficient education program of British values, that they will become as indistinguishably British, peaceful, prosperous, rational and tolerant as you or I. It is that lie that led them to turn Birmingham into a third world slum. And then the predictable consequences that have erupted, well, they just throw their hands up in shock. Let's go to the ONS census map, actually. This should prove enlightening to people who are outside of the UK. Now, bear in mind, this is 5 years out of date. This is pre-Boris wave, so things are much worse now. But let's go with white, English, Welsh, Scottish, and Northern Irish. So the darker areas are still majority indigenous. The paler areas are not. And this is done on self-identification, by the way. So you zoom into Birmingham, looking very, very pale. Look at Aston. I think it was Aston where they put these up. Yeah, it was Aston, yeah. Let's look at Aston. People in Aston Park, 6% white British. People in Birchfield, 5%. Lolzells, 5%. Other Birchfield, 6%. 14% in Neshalls. Oh, that number's a bit high, isn't it? 21% in North Central and Dartmouth Circus. So, I wonder why we're seeing this problem. It's because of demographic change, which should never have happened in the first place. So last night, this wasn't the only thing that happened in anticipation of the match. This was a group of youths, yet again, masked up, dressed in black, all filming, of course, clashing with riot police in anticipation, again, of this football match, because they see the police as the unjust incursion of a foreign authority. They think that they have Birmingham as their own little ethnic outpost. They think that it should be subjected to Sharia law, where various courts are already set up. Britain is now the Western capital for Sharia law. The number of unregistered marriages that go on are in the thousands. I don't doubt there are lots of child marriages too, because one of the most egregious grooming gang stories was in Bradford, where a social worker who ended up arranging for an abused girl to be adopted by her rapist's family attended the wedding of a 14-year-old girl, pseudonymized as Anna, to her rapist in a traditional Islamic ceremony, which of course wasn't registered. But she went. As a child. So, these self-governing enclaves are doing practices like that. Honour violence, FGM, child marriages. And the police, when they show up to say, oh, well, you're getting a bit unruly here, lads. You know, there's a lot of guys in masks and black coats seeming to be committing violence. Well, the police get fireworks shot at them. They get chased down. They fight with said youths. And then this happens. If it weren't for the green and red colours, you'd think this is central Lebanon. Now, I don't think that these youths in question are Catholics celebrating bonfire night. Well, lamenting the fact that Guy Fawkes, true patriot, was discovered. I don't think they're Protestants either, celebrating the fact that Guy Fawkes was apprehended. I don't think they know what bonfire night is, really, beyond an excuse to set off a few fireworks. I think this is just them, yet again, shooting explosives at the police like they did at the previous Palestine marches, when they spooked police horses, and getting away with it. Because I think like 3 people have been arrested from this. Why aren't you just rounding them all up and throwing them into the back of vans? And I think the reason we know this is twofold. Number one, anti-racist police practices means that they take a lenient view on what disproportionately violent minorities should be allowed to do. And 2, they know that in Birmingham, because of the demographic volume of mass migration in the area, they're outnumbered. They know that without a significant escalation of force, they can't get a handle on this situation. And so, this is something we all have to consider. When it comes time to do mass deportations, when it comes time to knock on doors of houses of multiple occupancy where illegal migrants and fake asylum seekers are being housed, when it comes time to repeal the citizenship of unassimilable, welfare-dependent, terror-supporting criminals and send them back to their ancestral lands, we're going to face a lot of opposition. There's going to be violence from these people, and any response, much like ICE in America, any response in kind to enforce the law as is right and proper will be decried as fascism and totalitarianism. Now, it won't be. Philosophically, in practice, it won't be. But we'll have to build up our constitutions and build a stomach for the exercise of lawful authority and force when getting rid of these people. Because they are criminals, they're uninvited guests, they're unwanted in our country, they're making it worse, they're turning London into Lahore, Birmingham into Islamabad. Lots of them are going to have to go, but they're going to be even more violent than they were last night. So it's just a thing to remind you of. And I'm reminding you of it because we are still being told that all these people shooting fireworks at police are as British as you and me. They're not. Never will be. Don't need to be here. Shouldn't be doing this. Right, speaking of people who aren't British. Oh, curious. Have they deleted the article? Brilliant. Well, this is the guy from the Huntingdon train stabbing. I hate when they do that. Let me try and fix this. The guy from the Huntingdon train stabbing. There we go. It's probably my fault. I broke the link. So it turns out that we have his name. We have his identity. It wasn't 2 men. The police mistakenly tasered a Caribbean man with a British passport. Poor guy, actually. It wasn't at fault. But this guy Anthony Williams, as expected. It's like the other Nigerian descendant schizo who stabbed a guy in military uniform. I forget. That was recently, wasn't it? I think that was Anthony something, wasn't it? And then there was Valdo Calacane, the other African schizo who stabbed 2 students and a caretaker to death in Nottingham. And you saw Raiku do Don't Look Back in anger preemptively in overdrive with one Nottingham, one together, bussing out the imams, saying that we shouldn't hold any hate for anyone because of their race and religion in their heart. Overplayed the hand there. Anyway, Anthony Williams, yet again, is accused of trying to kill 10 people in the Huntingdon train attack. And he was also being investigated with and charged with some of slashing another passenger at Pontoon Dock DLR station in London in the early hours of Saturday. So he slashed him in the face with a knife. Another random attack. He then appeared in a barber shop wielding a knife. This is a CCTV of it. Gets a knife out of his bag in a random barber shop. Scares all the customers to death. Starts ranting and raving. And just walks out. Now, he's also alleged to have stabbed a 14-year-old boy earlier in the day in the city centre. This guy was just going on a random stabbing spree and was never apprehended. Now, was he known to police? Predictably, a neighbour had called the police about him before, about a week before, in the early hours of October the 25th, because he caught him on CCTV attacking his car for no reason. This is Jan Kraushenko. He's a dad. And Anthony Williams decided to just randomly attack his car in Cambridgeshire. He's just been going like all across the country, just doing random things. Apparently he looked at a passenger on the train, a woman who had pleaded for her life, and said the devil isn't going to win. So he's just out of his mind, as disproportionately many people from African and Caribbean backgrounds are, because they have a 9 to 10 times propensity to be diagnosed with a form of psychosis or schizophrenia. And as my friend Carl Benjamin, in a recent video about liberalism, which you should all go and watch, by the way, excellent video essay, pointed out, this may be genetic, but it also may be lifestyle, considering the rates of cannabis, smoking and drug use in those communities is very high. And speaking from experience, my uncle, who took cannabis and LSD, ended up getting schizophrenia. He thought there were demons in his blood. He rejected help from our family, and sadly he died about, blimey, 17 years ago now. Whether it was suicide or he was chased onto the tracks, actually, we don't still know, because he was found without his wallet and his phone, so it seems like his body may have been robbed. But that was what set him off. And so, whether genetics or whether lifestyle, there is a disproportionate rate of insanity, violent insanity, in these communities who don't need to be here. Their presence is an option. Yes, there are always some nice black people. Of course. Again, guy who leads my congregation. Excellent chap. Family I grew up next to. Ghanaian Christians. Very generous. Exceptions do not disprove rules. And countries are bad because, generally, out of habit, those people are bad. They believe stupid things. They do stupid things. They do evil things. And so, maybe we can leave the countries alone for a few hundred years and see if it works out. Hope it improves, especially with the influence of Christianity on Africa, where it's the fastest growing place. But for the time being, we just don't need to have men like Anthony Williams roaming around our neighbourhoods, attacking our property, trying to stab people to death. For no reason. We just don't need to have them. Very uncomfortable conversation, but it needs to be had. Speaking of African criminals, the Southport inquiry. These revelations are particularly damning because Axel Rudakubana's family gave their testimony in the last couple of days. And there's a lot. So, Dion Rudakubana was first. This was on the 4th of November. And everything that I suspected in a video that went up on my channel a few days ago from a segment from Talk TV, everything I suspected about the family knowing about Rudakubana's, Axel's, violent temperament, that he had voiced his concerns before about his anxieties about needing to commit a white genocide, that an adult in the household must have taken the package containing the knife in, because Amazon do age checks, that someone must have given him the money and the debit card with which to order the knife and the rice in online, and the fault must lie with his parents there, especially because they bought him the tablet and paid for the broadband he used to research ISIS car bombings and historic genocides. All of those predictions proved to be true. So, his brother told stories about how he was being attacked by his own brother frequently. He says that he thought that his brother reminded him of Anton Chigurh, Javier Bardem's character in No Country for Old Men. He said he compared his brother to the sociopath from No Country for Old Men. I watched it recently and it concerned me. Alphonse in the statement, this is details from his father as well, saying his father, Alphonse, hit his 8-year-old, so he beat his sons. So, and this is very common as well. Stefan Molyneux's talked about this a lot. The perpetrators of violence are usually beaten as children because they learn to get their way, they have to use violence. And this is very common among Black and African households. Black Americans in America do the same thing. Physical violence has a negative impact on impulse control, on IQ, on one's ability to reason. And it teaches children that the only way to get what they want is violence. So, by beating your children, Alphonse Rudakubana raised a killer. He said the fact that he hit his children were false, but he says he smacked them when they were fighting each other, including the use of a slipper. We're going to see a consistent pattern as we go through this. That honesty is not the Rudakubana family's strong point. And that this is the case, yet again, for jihadist terrorists and for people from that part of the world. Either because honesty is not a thing in their culture, or because they're not intelligent enough to have coherent thoughts. Like, one thing they say does not necessarily connect to the next. This lines up with impulse control, or it also lines up with just basic powers of reasoning. Now, Dion Rudakubana is going to university and he seems fairly coherent in his account of things. The parents sound negligent, dishonest, and, frankly, stupid. That does not mean they are less morally culpable for the evil that they raised and helped hide from the authorities. Alphonse says in his statement he didn't threaten Axel with a knife, and that he has a tendency to make false allegations. Dion agrees his parents had lost control of him by 2019 onwards. Dion said that he feared that Axel would kill their father. He tells the inquiry that Axel's behaviour escalated from when Dion was 15. Messages were sent by Dion when he was home for Christmas in 2022. He says, "My brother doesn't show mercy. My dad just has to try to not die. We hid knives to mitigate that factor." Right, so they knew he was wielding knives and threatening his own family members. Why didn't they hand their son over to the police? Because they didn't want the collective shame on their family. They say this time and time again. They could have intervened. They could have institutionalized their son. They could have prevented their son from committing further violence after he'd already committed violence against his classmates, bought knives, dumped hot oil on his father, and yet they didn't allow the outside world to intervene. Because you have to understand that the rest of the world does not have our individualistic morality in Northwestern Europe and the Anglosphere, more broadly. They don't think that their families should be subjected to a universal standard of justice. They think that they will do whatever they can to continue to advantage their own families, including making excuses for and hiding from the authorities the violent temperaments of their children. Dion says, "I remember being scared somebody was going to die. My dad." So they terrorized their own other son. Axel would hit him, but that didn't seem unusual for brothers who felt as strong as they did about things, Dion tells the inquiry. Dion adds Axel resented the fact he got more attention and that they had to change schools. His brother was bigger than him and he said he felt increasingly wary. Axel had a short temper and was physically violent towards him a few times a week. He said the violence was building noticeably, with Axel breaking or smashing plates and glasses after he was expelled from school in 2019. So again, they had 5 years to sort this out. And they didn't. They just didn't. He also details something interesting. His parents studied for degrees and moved to Southport in 2013 because his mother got a job. Right, okay. They were studying for degrees, presumably with student loans, which they didn't repay because they never made more in tax than they lost. Because his dad was selling bric-a-brac in a business named after Harry Redknapp and was working as a taxi driver. They then bought a house from a social housing plot. They were in witness protection. They were given asylum. So at all stages of interaction with our country, with the state, their stay was subsidised. They benefited from the generosity of our country, even though the public, had they known about it, probably wouldn't want them here. Why were they granted asylum 8 years after the Rwandan genocide? Another question that still hasn't been asked or answered. And they chose to repay our gratitude by raising a murderer and hiding it from us. Inexcusable. Dion then says he was bullied at school, which is something that Axel said. But, excuse me, but Axel would say he wanted white genocide, he was impulsive, he wouldn't shower, he would attack people, including his own parents. Like, he shouldn't have been placed in the general population school. He shouldn't be in the country in the first place. But he shouldn't be around other children. So, is it bullying, or is it self-defense by the children who were in the classroom with a violent psycho? And again, I'm not trying to say that Dion's being dishonest here, because he seems to have been transparent through all stages of the inquiry, and he genuinely seems to have been, unless there's something we don't know, an unwitting victim of his parents' negligent parenting and his brother's own violence. It's parents' fault. It's Axel's fault. So then we get on to his father. Oh, one quick thing. Dion says that the police came to the family home on the 7th of October 2019, when Axel brought a knife into school, saying he intended to use the knife. Dion says the school made an example of his brother. His actions in the situation was not simply in isolation, but the school's head said he didn't know of any other children being caught with a knife. So there you go. And he said he was lining up for a maths lesson when his brother arrived at the school 2 months later, armed with a knife to attack a pupil with a hockey stick, while carrying the knife in his rucksack. He saw teachers running and chasing him, and that's when Axel broke the guy's wrist, or fractured it, with the hockey stick. So, we get on to Alphonse's testimony, which, that was today, I believe, earlier today, and his mother, Letitia. The inquiry found that Rudakubana's mother showed his brother knife packaging she found in the washing machine shortly after Axel left home on the 29th of July last year. His parents didn't seem alarmed, and his mother went back to bed. Dion said he saw an open box in the living room with similar knife packaging, but he didn't tell his parents about it. There was no discussion about contacting the police. We didn't believe he intended to harm anyone. So this is also negligent by his brother, but most negligent of all by his parents, because how did he get the knife? Well, turns out that Alphonse Rudakubana took in the package with the knife multiple times and gave his son the money for the knife. Now, he knew that his son was violent. Southport killer's dad called the police after his son threw an item at a rental car in November 2021. He had spent 12 hours hunting ingredients and cooking food, but Axel turned violent because he didn't like and insulted it. The inquiry hears Alphonse referred some of the violent incidents to child and adolescent mental health services, but not all of them. He assumed the police would have shared the information with other agencies and professionals. He says his son is autistic, so that made me be forgiving to him, more understanding, letting it happen, because he was always calm down and have a normal life. You know, it's funny. Usually, autists take an, I don't know, unorthodox obsession with locomotive engines or dinosaurs or World War II. I don't know that autism makes you fixated on white genocide and gleeing about butchering a 6-year-old girl and stabbing one girl over 100 times and trying to behead her. I don't think autism is an excuse for all these outbursts, actually. I think it's your parenting. I think it's you teaching him that violence was the only legitimate response to getting his way. I think he has a host of other issues. And I also think that he is ontologically evil. We can reintroduce that language and reintroduce punishments which suit those crimes. So then, Alphonse, it revealed, there's the oil part. There was a bit over here. Here we go. Alphonse knew that his son had ordered a machete in June 2023. His father says he didn't confront him because he would fly into a rage and threaten to kill him by that time. Okay. Where did he get the money? We'll find out later. If your violent son has a machete 4 years after being excluded from school for carrying a knife multiple times and breaking a kid's wrist, and you fear for your life, why would you not tell the police, hey, my son has a knife and he's threatened to kill me. Please take him away from the house and imprison him. He says his son never used weapons against him but would throw things at me. He suggests that Dion was exaggerating in messages to a friend about his fears that his father would be killed. Axel was threatened to kill you. He had a machete. He was angry. He ended up killing people. But you're still now saying that your son was exaggerating. Like, why are these people here? They're not coherent. They're a danger to the public, either because they're negligent or willfully deceitful. And they've raised a killer. Like, why were they ever here? Why is anyone who behaves like them here? They shouldn't be. It's all a choice. So then, when Axel did the school attack in 2019, police threatened to arrest Alphonse because he was shouting, apparently, at the police officers who brought his son home in handcuffs. Asked what effect, that in the face of serious criminal misbehaviour his response was to attack police, that would have had on his son, Alphonse again disagrees that he behaved in that way and asked to see the body-worn footage. Yep, please, release that. It's great. He says he lost control over his son. He's called into a meeting at the Acorn School in Lancashire over concerns about his son's internet searches and conversations. You know, keeps bringing up white genocide and terror attacks to teachers. Search for school shootings and talk about guns, decapitations. His dad said he didn't feel he was a danger to himself or others, and never lied. He said the school was like a prison and asked to see recorded evidence of what his son had said. Constantly siding with his violent son, even after he attacks other students, brings a knife into school, threatens his other son and him. Alphonse accepts he was very naive and sees his reaction in the meeting wasn't appropriate. Yeah, you think? I had lost control. I had no authority as a father. No, you beat him. You allowed him to terrorize his brother. You allowed him to terrorize his classmates. You made excuses for his violent behavior. And even now, you're trying to evade full responsibility. She says there's another side to him that I didn't know. The dishonesty is just... But then the worst part. The worst part are these revelations. So first of all, he admits to withholding information from Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, as well as the Lancashire Young Offenders team. The inquiry heard that the Southport killer's father hid a large knife his son ordered in June 2023, atop the machete from May, on top of a wardrobe, while Axel ordered another knife in October that year. How was he ordering the knife? He knew that his son kept ordering knives, after being excluded from school permanently for carrying knives 11 times, and then breaking back into the school with a knife and hockey stick. He did nothing. Alphonse knew his son had brought a jerry can and asked for petrol. What possible reason could he do for that? Mowing the lawn? He knew. He knew the entire time. He knew about the rice in as well. He ordered the rice in using his dad's name, but Alphonse thought it was for gardening. Even though he admits he never actually saw his son doing any gardening. Only after the tragic events did he start to think about it and thought it was a mistake. He said he thought one of the packages contained seeds, but believed it was due to his interest in gardening, although he never saw his son do any. And actually, his son got really angry when Alphonse cut the grass over the grave of his hamster. Axel Rudakubana's parents learned he was taking knives to school, so they hid the kitchen knives behind some of the trays in the kitchen drawer. He found the knives. He was taking one to school. He then disposed of all the knives, apart from a 4cm vegetable preparation blade and a bendy bread knife in the cupboard that he had to use a chair to get to. Axel found the school knife and was arrested when carrying it on a bus in March in 2022. The obsession with bringing knives. There was actually a part I remember in Dion's testimony I skipped over, where he said that his parents would tell them stories about the Rwandan genocide and this deeply affected them. The parents said, oh, it can't have affected them that much. So stories about Africans butchering each other with knives, and then their son develops an interest in mass stabbings, whether or not this is some kind of beaver building a dam out of teddy bear's instinct, or instilled in him from family history. One has to wonder. Nevertheless, he kept having knives in school. He kept having knives in public. He kept ordering knives on the internet. Using his father's name. Using family money. Did the parents do anything? No. He should have been locked in a box for a very long time. And yet, the parents hid information from social services, refused to call the police repeatedly, actually argued with the police in the school. At every stage, they obstructed justice. They deserve to be charged, tried, And, whether or not they're convicted, they definitely should be deported. He denies there was a knife block in the kitchen when police brought his son home. So again, he told police didn't have any knives in the house. This is the worst one. He accepted the delivery of the machete in June 2023. He said he knew it was a knife, but was scared of his son by then, so didn't take any action because it would have triggered a violent episode. Completely contradicts the idea, as stated before, that Dion was exaggerating claims that his life was at threat. Like, they're either lying, or they can't join up their thinking because they're just not intelligent enough. Either way, their negligence and behaviour had led to the death of 3 children. I was afraid I would be attacked. The packaging, bladed items, delivery to 18 plus only, and was addressed to Alice. The inquiry hears. Alphonse says he put the machete on top of a wardrobe in his bedroom. That was an incident I regret so much. I think it may have emboldened him, encouraged him to order more items. On October the 3rd, another machete was ordered using a false Nigerian name to the family home. The return address was to Knife Warehouse. Alphonse says in his statement, it's more likely that he accepted the delivery, but can't rule out it was his son. So saying it might have been Dion. Which would have been strange because he's in a wheelchair, isn't he? Questions there. Counsel to the inquiry, Nicholas Moss, points to his witness statement in which he said, I only ever took delivery of one package I knew of to be believed to be a knife, and suggests it was a lie. Alphonse says it's not. If it's established that it's me that accepted the package, he put it behind the door in his house. The inquiry heard a third machete was also ordered. Do you not think after the second machete you should have alerted the police? So here we find out how he ordered the knives, not just how they got delivered and accepted. Asked how he got the money to buy the weapons, Alphonse said he gave his son some money to reward him if he had a shower and on occasions. He would get £40 if he had a shower on 3 occasions, while his mother would also give him money. I assume he didn't have that many showers because they weren't a wealthy family. But he gave his son the money repeatedly to buy these knives. He knew he was buying knives. He hid the knives. He didn't alert the police. He didn't have his son sectioned. He didn't have him committed to a juvenile detention centre. Instead, he withheld information from the authorities. He is culpable for this. Again, most people weren't answering these questions, and I hate being right, but I've been saying this for a very long time. I did a video on this ages ago when the Mail did a sympathetic article about the family calling them collateral damage in the crimes. No, they're responsible. They raised this killer. They enabled it. They paid for it. And even now, they're evading responsibility. According to the victims' families, by the way, because the victims' families gave statements, and good on them for not accepting this half-hearted apology by someone who... You can't actually apologise for something if you don't have a coherent understanding of what you did wrong. Here's an interesting one. The dad said he thought that he was going to carry out an arson attack, Axel Rudakubana, at his old school, the Range Hill High School, where it was the last day of term. Axel had a petrol can in the living room and asked his dad to buy him some petrol. I thought he wanted to use petrol to start a fire at the range. Yet again, didn't inform the school, didn't inform the police, nothing. And still says, oh, well, this attack came totally out of nowhere. I never thought that he threatened my life. The inquiry hears Axel stabbed the bed next to his father with a knife of the same type used in the Southport attack, demanding he give him a bigger knife. The 2 blades were delivered on the 15th of July in a package delivered from Amazon, which Alphonse said he likely accepted. So he previously said he only accepted 1 package, but then he accepted the machete and put it on top of his wardrobe. He then admits to accepting the package containing the knives that were the murder weapon. He's either retarded or lying. I genuinely, I use that term clinically. Either his IQ is so low that he can't actually understand causality, or he's lying. In either respect, he shouldn't be in our country. He should never have been in our country. This never needed to happen. And so, insisting that Axel Rudakubana is a Welsh choir boy, as we were originally gaslit, that he is as British as you and me, no. Neither are his parents. Neither is anyone who does this. Anyone who raises these killers. Anyone who commits these attacks. Anyone who is not of the ancestry indigenous to these isles. They didn't need to be here to ruin and end so many lives. They're not British. They never will be. And your unwillingness to exclude them from the category of British, even when they commit the most heinous crimes that are meant to violate your civic nationalist values of tolerance and fair play and the rule of law shows just how much of a lie it is. It is a lie that is endangering and ending lives. You know that's the case. Fraser Nelson, Owen Jones, Dr. Scholar, Michael Gove, and yet you still continue to tell it. Why? Do you not have any guilt whatsoever about bringing these people here or encouraging them to be here? About trying to obfuscate between the types of perpetrator that commit these crimes? That we can predict are going to commit these crimes? Do you know, I saw people kicking about this evidence the other day. I mean, it's grok. You have to, obviously take all AI responses with a pinch of salt, but they then did post the links below. That they haven't found a single recent mass stabbing event by an ethnically English national. It's just the sort of thing that happens in African war zones. How weird, then, that the majority of knife crime perpetrators and mass stabbers are of African heritage. They just don't need to be here. It's all an option. He was asked, Alphonse, about a bottle of pure alcohol his son had, and he said it was very frightening. He is asked about a bow and arrow he discovered under Axel's bed a month earlier. Said he was worried his son would use it against him, yet again. So it seems like, well, Dion's exaggerating, I didn't have a threat to my life. Lie. He also said he found a small Tupperware box containing clear fluid with spots of what looked like blue ink, and he just poured it down the toilet. He said he had no idea what it could have been, but it could have been crude preparation of the poison ricin. The things I was seeing weren't right, so why didn't you report them? Not once. Apparently, Axel had a small arsenal of weapons in his bedroom, including a sledgehammer. He threatened his dad, next time if you stop me, there will be consequences. He had firecrackers and matches. You saw the state of his bedroom. That's how they allowed him to live. They bought all of this stuff, they gave him the money for it. They knew he was doing it, and they did nothing. He told his wife, after he stopped Axel getting into a taxi the week before the Southport killings, it's obvious on that day he was going to attack the school. Our child needs to be protected. He could have been killed or imprisoned for life. Yep. He should have been. Because those girls would still be alive. You knew that he was going to do something, and you did nothing. You covered it up. We've just gotten inconsistencies. Outright lies, as the person cross-examining him has suggested. They are to blame. And he said, well, it's not fair that you can say I didn't have any regard for the potential victims of the attack. He said, oh, I was just rushing between jobs. I've never been in a hurry and said, oh, my friend or son or family member was going to commit a mass casualty event because he wants white genocide. Well, I'm a bit short on time, but I think my snap judgment is we're going to hide it from the police. Funny that. How I have a completely different moral system from this person. Asked what he thought his son would be given a life sentence for, he said, if he attacks anyone with the things he had, it's injuring other people or worse. But he said in his statement he believed the immediate danger had passed and didn't think there was a wider public risk, because the school was closed for the summer holidays. Yeah, he's got this, absolute cache of weapons that, if you stumbled upon Bin Laden hiding in a cave, you'd probably see similar scenes. But don't worry, school's shut for the summer. It's not like, in the future, he could just go to the school when it reopens in September, but perhaps he struggles with the concept of the future. We never realised our son was capable of mass stabbing, apparently. That's what he said, despite repeatedly ordering knives and threatening to stab him. Axel's brother Dion told the inquiry that their mother, Letitia Muziare, showed him knife packaging, but Alphonse is saying that Dion, his account, doesn't add up. I think Dion's account sounds pretty consistent to me. The counsel interviewing him says that Alphonse must have been seriously worried he was going to go out and attack somebody. Actually, no, Alphonse said. I just hoped for the best. I thought it was a good thing for him to go out. Like he's admitting in text and then just going back on himself. We shouldn't be dealing with any of this. Shouldn't be here. So, when asked what he thought about his son's attack, Alphonse says, I'm so desperately sorry for the children that were killed and everyone else. I cry for them all the time. When I cry for him, I remember them, I cry for them. I'm so ashamed I lost the courage to save the little angels and I'm so, so sorry. He said he accepts his share of responsibility. But then, Nicholas Bowen Casey, the lawyer representing the parents of the girls butchered, said they've listened to what you've said and have complete disdain for your excuses and the manner you've answered your questions. Good. Shouldn't be forgiven. He should be made to answer before his maker, and, frankly, if that meeting could be expedited, I think that would be just. But, lawfully, of course, but, in this case, we often hear, and we heard by Erica Kirk, that it's commendable to forgive murderers, as Christ forgave his murderers on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But I think that's up to the Almighty. I don't think it's our place to forgive people that are incapable of remorse, that won't accept responsibility, and whose actions, depraved, devoid of virtue, led to the avoidable butchering of so many children. I don't think it's our place to dole out forgiveness. I think that actually debases the currency of forgiveness. So his mother apologized as well, and she gave her testimony. She says her son complained about bullying. She said about her son's random angry outbursts, which could erupt 3 times a day. They could be triggered by him losing an argument or an unexpected visit from a social worker. But she says Axel wouldn't get violent or verbally aggressive with her and mainly did so with his father. Oh, so that's all right then. In her statement, she adds he spent most of his time reading online journals and learning with an interest in history, economics, current affairs and politics. He would also follow live coverage of the House of Commons. But Mazzari tells the inquiry his internet use was unsupervised and they didn't set up parental controls because she didn't think our boys would go online and look at bad things. Well, then you're at fault. Your negligent parenting is at fault for this. She also refused a home welfare visit. She complained about the visit, reporting her annoyance and confusion, and flatly refused to let them in. This was March 2023, after Rudakubana was being truant at his new school. He hadn't been for 10 months. Yet again, parents being negligent, paying him to shower. A couple of months after this, when he kept ordering machetes, of course, a doctor noted parental accommodation was the central problem driving the dysfunctional family dynamic after another visit, and yet social services didn't step in. Probably because, as the head teacher's report on Axel was censored when she said he was sinister, cold and calculating, they didn't want to profile a black boy with a knife. If social services were more discriminatory, those children would still be alive. If our immigration policy were more discriminatory and less generous to people who are ungrateful, then those girls would still be alive. She said that she thought the bow and arrow he had in his room was for sport. She's a keen Joe Rogan listener, I'm sure. Her husband said she was petrified when they found a bow and arrow, a bottle of pure alcohol and firecrackers, but she said she didn't see the weapons and only changed the sheets before leaving. The counsel in question on behalf of the parent says she is either extraordinarily naive or lying. I'm really naive. I'm really sorry for the way I am, she says. I don't believe her. Don't believe her. And I think, I'm no lawyer, but a just society would see here grounds for charging them as accessories to murder. They're to blame. They knew of his behaviour ahead of time, and they obstructed the authorities at every turn and enabled him buying the weapons, stashing them, growing in his violence against his brother and his classmates, indulging his fantasies with his fixation on genocides and terror attacks. I wish I'd told the police, she says. Everything got out of control. No, it was always within your control. You just did nothing. You did nothing to protect your son. So then the families released statements. This is Lauren and Ben King, parents of BB. And they said, what we're struggling to comprehend is not just the parents' failure, but their failure now to acknowledge, to take responsibility, to face up what they allowed to happen. The excuses, the contradictions, the lack of truth. It is hard to find words, especially when we reflect on the parents we were to BB and the child she was. We've been robbed of seeing her grow up into the beautiful, kind, joyful, selfless girl she was already becoming. A little girl who would have given this world so much. But this isn't about the actions of one family. It's about the repeated failings of agencies and professionals who should have known better, who did know better, and still did nothing. That's true. Prevent misspelled Axel's name so they couldn't find his 3 reports in the system. The same system, by the way, here, which is overwhelmingly referring people as right-wing extremists. When was the last time a right-wing extremist walked into a children's dance class and butchered 3 children, you abject coward? Same system that is to blame for allowing Axel Rudakubana to evade intervention and detection. But what you're seeing here with the confusion of these parents, God bless them, and seriously, they need all the strength they can get. Keep them in your prayer intentions this Sunday Mass, please. What they don't understand is what a lot of people don't understand, which is this is the clash of moral systems, insofar as this family has a moral system. There is no consistency. There is no honesty. There is no consideration for anyone outside their family and themselves, their reputation, their ease of life. They took and took and took from our civilization, and they raised a son who has robbed a loving family of their beautiful daughter. And your confusion, the country's confusion about why they would do this, why they would keep avoiding accountability, is because they're either cognitively incapable or culturally disinclined towards honesty, accountability, and morality. They do not think like us. They are not British. They never were, and they never will be. We have to understand that. These are Elsie's parents. They said, when it comes to reading the statements from Axel Rudakubana's parents specifically, we feel this needs to be said. Reading their statements has only added to the unbearable pain that David and I already live with every single day. We knew early on that their lack of parenting played a part in all of this, but these statements reveal a failure of parenting on a whole new level. We believe they should be held to account for what they allowed to happen. They knew how dangerous he was. They stayed silent. They didn't report their concerns. They didn't act. And in doing so, they failed not only as parents, but as members of our society. Agreed. I totally agree. I think we should act on the wishes of Elsie Stancombe's grieving parents and deport Axel Rudakubana's parents. Deport every single person who does not belong here and could be raising a killer in our midst. So, to round up, a few more stories before I finish off and do dinner for myself and my wife. Met police have let another sex offender go. Brilliant. This is Brahim Kadur Sharif. He's an Algerian sex offender. Milling about in London and Tower Hamlets. Meant to be deported. Wasn't. Don't worry though, he's not an asylum seeker. He's not one of the Algerians who had our women and girls marketed to them in 2023 by the people trafficking gangs that were targeting North African migrants by filming our wives and daughters, friends, sisters, without their consent, and just showing them as bits of meat to enterprising conquerors from the Muslim world. Don't worry though, not an asylum seeker. He's just a migrant. He's got his papers. He's got the passport. He's as British as you and me. Don't worry, lads. We don't need to have uncomfortable conversations about illegal migration. We don't even need to have a conversation about legal migration. He's got the papers. He's British. Nope. Not at all. Also an update from ITVX. Why wasn't he deported? The answer raises important questions about the dysfunctional interplay of visa rules with the criminal justice system. Official sources tell Robert Peston the explanation for why he had not been expelled from the UK. He was protected because there were other outstanding criminal proceedings against him. Oh, brilliant! So he was a repeated career criminal, a serial offender. So we can keep him in our country at our expense and then accidentally let him free because he just kept committing crimes. That's our fault for some reason. So there's this interview that I won't go through all of. Alison Pearson sat down with a woman who she's pseudonymized as Nikki, who works in the asylum system. And Nikki just said, look, being frank, I'm kept awake at night by the fact that I've probably granted asylum to a man who's committed a sex offence. There's a stat in here. In the first 6 months of this year, 339 court cases, including sexual attacks and violent assaults, involved a suspect who's a foreign national living in an asylum hotel. We know that up to a third of all sex crimes are committed by foreign nationals. That is not even broken down by ethnicity, because we don't know how many of those are foreigners with British passports, who are apparently just as British as you and me, but commit sex attacks at exponentially higher rates. Indians were the number one overall. Afghans and Eritreans committed sex attacks at 20 times the national average. Oh, and in here, there's a crazy part, where she says, people on the legacy backlog from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Libya, Syria and Yemen have been asked to fill out a questionnaire instead of having face-to-face interviews. In practice, that meant thousands of illegal migrants would get away with making stuff up, giving them a golden ticket to stay in Britain with no questions asked. There's a bit in here where she says that the Home Office staff, because of Rishi Sunak's promise to clear the asylum backlog and stop the boats, that the Home Office staff ratcheted up the number of people that they employed. After a 15-minute interview, the Home Office hired them. Hundreds of completely random people were drafted in, and with minimal training were put in charge of deciding who was safe to stay in the country. I actually spoke to someone who was working as a part-time civil servant on family reunification visas, and it radicalized them so much they got out of the job. They actually think the way that we do. And they were just saying, it's rubber stamping. People that should never have been here in the first place. So she says that at one point, of course, Eritreans were the most successful, and they were claiming to be from Eritrea. And she would ask them, what's the Eritrean flag? What's details about Eritrea? And they couldn't answer, but they were still approved anyway, because they were just lying. There was one case, she says, we had loads of Afghan claims, and they were mainly all refusals. It was safe to go back to Afghanistan. Then after the Taliban took over, we were given our refusals back and told we had to reassess. The first guy she had to reassess, it came up he'd been arrested multiple times for indecent exposure in child's play areas. She said, I'm refusing, he's a wrong 'un, and my senior manager said we can't refuse an Afghan. We got a grant. They knowingly allowed Afghan sex offenders into our country. And they said, you've got to make the decision on the basis of the claim. He can't be returned because he says he was politically active in Afghanistan against the Taliban. Just one anti-regime post on social media, and he says he's politically active. But I still refuse to make the grant, and I got disciplined for that. You know what other Afghans got approved? These guys. They ran a grinder scam. These guys are Ramat Khan Mohammedani and Bilal Hotak. They did 35 burglaries and 20 scams because they lured suckers, basically, poor choice of words, on Grindr to meet them in their homes for hookups, and then they robbed them. I like the idea, by the way, that these are actually the only genuine gay guys from Afghanistan claiming asylum, and that the robberies were just a cover story for gay sex. Why are these people in my country? Actually, the worst one, to finish on, worst one by far. There are a bunch of Afghans moved to Oxfordshire recently. This is something David Betts highlighted. This is in October 2023. He said at least 175 people, but maybe more, moved to Afghanistan. From Afghanistan to Oxfordshire. And then in a village near rural Swindon, there was a donkey that was raped. Like, why is this happening? Why is this in my country? The animal, named Maisie, the poor donkey, was found unwell by our owner. Her injuries were described on a community group on Facebook as a lot of blood being found, and there was a man's belt in the field, and after a vet assessment, it was suspected the animal had been sexually assaulted. Why on earth am I paying for Afghan donkey rapists to be in my country? I've reached a level of anger that's just exasperation now. Like, these are the people that our ruling class will insist are as British as you and me. A guy who breaks into a paddock and has sex with a donkey. There are much more constructive things that I'd rather be doing with my life than this, than discussing these stories. But I have to, because very few other people are discussing them. And remember, every single butchered child, attempted stabbing, terror attack, sexual assault, and molestation of a donkey is a choice. It's a choice that's been made for us by our political class who have imported these people from backwards lands where we can predict that they are not going to be honest, they're going to commit crimes, they're not going to recreate our civilization, they're going to turn Birmingham into a third world slum. Those people thought that there's some GDP rocket fuel or absolute genius hiding out in the foothills among the goat herders of Afghanistan. And they thought, brilliant, we'll bring them all in, en masse, and there'll be absolutely no barriers to entry whatsoever. As soon as they've got the paperwork, they'll be as British as you and me. What a lie. These terrorists, these African schizos, the parents that enabled them, The Afghans who molest donkeys. None of these people are British. They never will be. They're not wanted here. They should all be sent home. Every last one of them. The reason we're all being so hardline on this is because there are so many stories. Look at just the hours in the last week or so alone that I have filled by just reading headlines of crimes committed by people that never needed to be in the country in the first place. And everyone can recognise the difference between them and us. Because we don't do this. We have enough scumbags of our own. We should deal with them. Mass incarcerations, bring back the death penalty. That doesn't mean we become the #1 nation in the world for crimes committed by foreign criminals. That doesn't even mention the gang of black youths that kicked a random kid's head in and were let go by police without criminal charges in Swindon recently that Carl Benjamin covered on his channel. Doesn't even mention Zoran Mamdani, who's just won in New York. A lesson that elections will just become demographic headcounts. That his entire politics is just ethnic grievance. White people have stuff we want and I need to redistribute it to my co-ethnics. That's not even mentioning Adil Ray, who came out and defended him. You know, British Asian, moderate Muslim Adil Ray, who lauded his racial grievance politics as, at a time of division, a politics of hope. That now some UK leader should do the same. And said, Mamdani might implement Sharia law, but the heart of Sharia law is social justice, welfare, fairness, charity and cohesion. Most Muslim countries operate a hybrid of Sharia and civil law, are slowly reforming and abandoning unethical practices despite the West's betrayal. Nope, not true. Cousin marriage still really high. Treatment of women and children, barbaric. Genital mutilation. Honour killings. Terror attacks. And, even if they were all peaceful, they would not create my country, Adil, because Muslims practice Islam, and Islam did not build Britain. Islam does not belong here. If you like these Muslim countries so much, go and live in one. But, as we can see, by pushing Sharia law as some benevolent thing that has never done anything wrong, he is providing cover for the exact kind of people who, well, read the Quran and take it seriously and know what jihad actually means, and are plotting the kind of terror attacks that I spoke about earlier. But, because these people were born here, we're meant to expect they're just as British as you and me. The action we should take from now on, the attitude we should take, is that of Rupert Lowe. You can watch his speech in your own time. But this could be most accurately summed up by just saying, I don't care. I don't care what their human rights appeals are. I don't care what piece of paperwork they have. I don't care what passport they've got. I don't even care if they were born here. They're not British. They never will be. And if they're not, our friends and our family, if they are not grateful to have inherited our civilization, to be the beneficiaries of riches and rights their ancestors never were. If they're not like, for example, Suella Braverman, who says, well, I couldn't be English, there's something sacred about English identity. If they're not like that, and most aren't, they need to go. We've just had enough of it now. We're just not putting up with the butchering anymore. It's a choice. It's a choice that we don't have to make. Well, I'm sorry about such a another depressing stream, ladies and gentlemen. So much horrific stuff is going on in my country. I'll see if there are any super chats that came in over the time that we were talking. Thank you all for the engagement with content the last few days. Actually, there was a video I put out earlier that you may have seen, which is audio only, unfortunately, but was the pilot episode for a new podcast that I'm doing with Tate Brown called Across the Pond. On this weekend, we will have episodes that will have audio so that you can, and video so that you can watch along with us. It's just that Tate accidentally forgot to record the video last time. Yes, I am blaming him. God bless. So there are a couple of super chats here. Robert White, especially with criminality, I don't understand why the Polish data isn't used more to show there is indeed a strong link between an increase in crime and an increase in immigration. There's data from Denmark, from the Netherlands. The problem is, these people aren't amenable to data, because data itself is racist. They think in terms of Schrodinger's diversity. If you notice differences, you're creating division, thereby causing crime. Because the original position for them is the blank slate. And it's that delusion that's getting us killed. We just need to renounce the blank slate. No, we're not all equal. No, we're not all indistinguishable. No, you can't remedy differences in behaviour between groups of people by redistributing income or providing them social housing or giving them class and women's consent or lowering a few Union Jacks as to not antagonise the new arrivals. Final one. Boogaloo Dawn. Get you some spice, lad. Thank you for the hard work you put into saving our culture. Well, I appreciate it. I just say things. My conscience is troubled, therefore I feel compelled to inform people. And hopefully this format, as well as some other videos that are coming out soon, I've got a more cultural focused one due out tomorrow, probably. Hopefully they contribute to the discourse. If you want to follow the rest of my work, you know, Substack, link down in the description. You can go read Courage Media, you can go follow me on X if you're not already. You're welcome to clip this and share it around. I will be back streaming, most likely, next week, but there'll be videos out in the next few days. Probably some spicy ones as well, I hope so. But I hope I'm doing the right thing, and I do read your comments, and I appreciate the feedback. So thank you all very much for your help, your attention. Take care of your families, it's dangerous out there. Till next time, God bless, and goodbye.